All right, everybody. Good afternoon. Friday afternoon, December 20th. We have an awesome special guest today, Steve Cohen from AYR Wellness. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real treat to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We have a lot to talk about and not a ton of time, so I just want to get right into it. It is an awesome day in the cannabis space. We finally needed one. So to the extent that there is a high correlation between having you on and the green in the space, maybe if you can come on more frequently, that would be awesome.
I'll come. If it's good for the industry, I'll be here every day.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll start with the biggest, most recent news that I know got a lot of social media buzz. It's probably going to make you a little bit busier, but you're on the Tilray board. Tell us about that. How did that happen? What are some of the plans there?
Well, I have been on the Tilray board. I haven't even had time to have a cup of coffee on the Tilray board, so it's hard for me to speak with any real insight other than that of an observer because it has been such a short period. But I can tell you, it has for me been an interesting set of relationships that have led me to the Tilray board. The conversations started long before I ever started with AYR as the interim CEO.
Oh, wow.
But oddly enough, my introduction to AYR was through Irwin Simon, the chair and CEO of Tilray. Irwin, I know because our sons were friendly in high school.
Nice.
And one day, it's almost 8 years ago, maybe even more, I was the chief administrative officer of McAndrews and Forbes, which is Ronald Perlman's holding company. And he said to me, a guy named Irwin Simon, who built Hanes Celestial, is coming in to talk about trying to do a deal. And Ronald said, so if you're not doing anything at whatever time it was, I need you in the meeting. And I said, I know Irwin Simon. And Ronald said, how do you know Irwin? I told him the story. And the next thing I knew, Irwin and I were negotiating a deal that led to him acquiring out of McAndrews two businesses we had. At the time, it was a company called MFW Worldwide, which was largely a licorice business, and a company called Marisant, which was in the sweeteners, non-caloric sweeteners business. And it became a company that, through a SPAC process, became a public company, Whole Earth Brands. And after the transaction closed, Irwin called and said, why don't you come on the Whole Earth board? And I said, no conflict, sure. And so I was on the Whole Earth board for a number of years, and we ended up in a transaction where I chaired the special committee and the business went private. And so now here I was, having had this great experience with Whole Earth. I love the company, by the way. I've always loved that company. But now it was gone. I lost my board seat because there was no more board. And after some period of time, Irwin called me and said, I know you know about cannabis. Now, how did I know about cannabis? Because one day I was sitting in his office talking about a Whole Earth issue, and John Sandelman came in. And
Oh, wow.
Irwin introduced me, and Sandelman said, I need a GC, I need an executive. Will you come to AYR? And I said, no, I am not interested in coming to AYR. I don't want to be a GC again. I've done that already in my career. And he said, well, what would you want to do? I said, well, I'm happy I do public company advisory work. And so I became an advisor to the board of AYR. And that ultimately led to me being interim CEO. And in the meantime, along the way, I agreed to join Tilray, which is a really, really interesting company. And I love people who take contrary positions. And Tilray is the exact opposite in the way of every MSO that is currently operating.
Right. Yeah, that will be interesting. That is an interesting history too, to know that there was actually connections before. And maybe before we talk about AYR a little bit, I was looking at your background. I'd love for you to share that with everyone that's watching. I saw everything from working at the SEC to working for judges, obviously, lots of legal work along the way, but maybe a little bit of a background of your experience.
Yeah, somebody once said to me, you should have a good career. And I said, if having one good career is a good thing, why don't I have 4 or 5? And let's see if we can do them simultaneously.
Right.
So I'll give you the quick overview, which it does sound sort of strange and beyond eclectic. And in fact, somebody said to me, "How are you viewed in the legal community? Because as far as I am concerned, it seems to me you're a platypus," which I took as a sort of an odd compliment,
Yep.
and not an actual comment on my physical looks. I started years ago when I was an undergraduate at NYU, oddly enough, working for Mario Cuomo. And it was a phenomenal experience, 1984, before the Democratic National Convention, which was really the turning point in Mario's national profile. So I was there before that, and he was this phenomenal mentor for me. And I had been planning to go to law school. He encouraged me to go to law school. I was thinking about going back to state government. He said, absolutely not. It's one of the all-time great pieces of mentoring I received other than from my parents in life. Mario said to me at a time when it really was not true, he said, we can use you here. We need you, but you don't need us. Go out and learn how to be a lawyer. And once you're a lawyer, we'll want you back, but you'll come back at a high position, or you can just go on and have a career doing whatever you want. And Mario believed in being a lawyer in a way that most people don't understand anymore. He thought it was more than a profession. It was a calling, and it was a way to think about the world and your role in the world. And so after Mario, I did a federal clerkship with two judges. Back then, it was a world in which you left law school and clerked for a judge. Now you go work for a few years. In my day, you could go right and work for a judge. I worked for a phenomenal judge named Stan Sporkin, who is really the father of SEC enforcement. The founder created the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act out of his own brain, and just was a phenomenal person to work for and a terrific judge. And then I was supposed to clerk for another judge, a Court of Appeals judge in New York, Second Circuit judge, another wonderful man named Frank Altamari. I had 6 months between the two. Sporkin said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to go to a law firm, make some money." He said, "Why would you ever want to do that?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to get married and having money might be a good thing. Plenty of time to make money. I'm the former director of enforcement of the SEC. You have to go to the SEC."
Wow.
And so I said, "But it's a 3-year commitment." "Forget commitments. I'll make a call. You'll go to the SEC." So I became an enforcement staff attorney at the SEC between my clerkships, did a in-depth penny stock fraud investigation, not unlike what you see in Wolf of Wall Street.
Right.
And then off, I become a law clerk, and I then end up being lucky enough to get the greatest job a lawyer who wants to litigate can ever get, which is I become an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York.
Busy, huh?
I expected to do securities fraud cases, and the next thing I knew, I was specializing in gang prosecutions, and spent about 8 years there. Ended up being one of the founders and then the chief of the violent gangs unit. Prosecuted the Latin Kings and others.
Wow.
Tried to go into private practice, but I got dragged into other things. I ended up doing a wrongful conviction case, a big wrongful conviction case. I ended up representing Napster, care of my friend, one of the greatest general counsels in the United States. A guy named Jonathan Schwartz was the general counsel of Napster, brought me in to represent Napster. Did a lot of white collar fraud cases representing defendants before the SEC, U.S. Attorney's Office, so forth and so on. And then one day I get a phone call. Andrew Cuomo has now been elected Attorney General of the state of New York. And the notion is, come run this office. And he and I had a history beginning back in the early days of the first Mario Cuomo administration. So I end up going to the New York State Attorney General's office. I was the counselor and chief of staff. I ran it for the AG. He then went to the governor's office. I thought we would say goodbye. I was ready to move back and do something out of government. And I got my arm twisted to go and be what in New York is called the secretary to the governor, which is essentially the chief of staff. I agreed to do it for a year to help him with the transition. And I was there for that first year. I had one of the greatest experiences in my life of working on the passage of marriage equality in the state of New York, which was a triumphant, ascendant moment, proving that government can matter and can work. And then I leave, and I think I'm going back to a law firm, and I start doing some work for Ronald Perlman. And Ronald convinces me eventually to split my time between my firm and him. And I worked for Ronald originally as chief administrative officer, and then I ended up taking the legal function too. And I did that for about 8 or 9 years, stayed involved in state politics. COVID hits. Meanwhile, along the way, I had been the vice chair of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, got interested in infrastructure, ended up chairing the New York State Economic Development Agency, Empire State Development, worked on the Gateway Project, building the rail tunnel into the Hudson. And, when I finally emerge, where do I find myself? Sitting on a couch in Erwin Simon's room talking to John Sandelman. And that's how I end up at AYR Wellness.
That is awesome.
As my
Very
grandmother
cool.
would say, because I always love to plug my grandmother, the source of great wisdom. That's it in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Very cool. And you mentioned, at least when we were chatting in the green room, there is a book about one of the cases you worked on. Remind me of the name again?
Yeah, there's a book called The Sing Sing Files and a TV documentary called The Sing Sing Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a journalist, a Dateline NBC producer named Dan Slepian, who years ago, in 2000 or so, 1999, 2000, ended up embedded with the Bronx Homicide Unit of the NYPD, and stumbled upon a case I was working on with this extraordinary detective, a true hero, a guy named Bobby Adelarato. And it stemmed from a murder at the Palladium nightclub on 14th Street in Manhattan, 9th Precinct, Thanksgiving night, 1990. 2 men are ejected from the club, come back with guns, shoot up the front. A bouncer dies, a guy named Marcus Peterson is killed. And 2 men ultimately go to trial and are convicted, David Lemus and Olmedo Hidalgo. And Bobby and I, the detective, Bobby Adelarato and I, come to learn, while I'm a federal prosecutor and he's a detective working in the U.S. Attorney's Office, that the wrong guys are in jail. And it becomes this bizarre odyssey, taking 10 years, hearings, and ultimately a retrial to get these men out of jail. Dan Slepian finds this case and begins working with us, and it changes the path of Dan's career and life. And what the book is about is Dan's experience going from one wrongful conviction case to the next as he follows this 20-year line of cases, ultimately culminating in this relationship he has with a gentleman named J.J. Velasquez, who spent more than 20 years at Sing Sing. And J.J. finally has been vindicated. But Dan really, in this book, which is available where all books are sold, Dan Slepian, it is this amazing story of tenacity, but also what's wrong with the criminal justice system. And in fact, Dan and JJ insist on not using the phrase criminal justice. For them, it's the adversarial system. It's the criminal adversarial system, because it's not focused on justice.
Right. Wow, interesting. All right. Well, for those watching, be sure check out the book or the show. Let's turn to AYR. You are the interim CEO. How is the search going? Are you under consideration for the role? Are you close, far away? What's the status there?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is now called the Dick Cheney. Am I doing the Dick Cheney, doing the search and finding that only I am capable of holding the office? I have disavowed from the get-go the Dick Cheney. And in fact, there are many, many candidates that are under consideration that would be better at this position than I am. And so I am delighted to say that it's going well. There actually have been, both internal and externally, far more candidates than I imagined. It's a complicated industry, but I think in an interesting way, the industry has turned the corner in terms of what I would say 5 years ago or 6 years ago was the stigma that went with cannabis. And I think that's faded away, which means both within the industry, but also outside, there are a whole lot of folks in similar industries who are willing to consider a space in cannabis. And there are a whole lot of folks who have spent their careers sort of in and out of industries where they become CEOs, they work on turnarounds, they work on revamping companies, who have a real interest in AYR, which I take as a really promising validation of what I see when I look at this company.
Nice. And so what strengths are you looking for? It almost sounds like you would maybe likely pull from without outside of the industry. What's the critical things that you, in terms of attributes of that person's experience that you're really looking for?
Yeah, I'll say first and foremost, if the person has cannabis experience, they do move to the top of the pile.
Okay.
It's a complicated industry. It's hard to explain to people who haven't been in this industry what the complexities are. And the
Right.
first time you tell people, people who think they're well informed, they don't understand. They think they misheard you. People talk about, your biggest mistake is you don't have a unified supply chain for your industry. You should be growing in one location. Yeah, let me explain that to you. No, that can't be. Yeah, that is. So that's part of the, sort of the intriguing quality of discussing the opportunity. But I think what I would focus on, and again, it's ultimately a board decision, but my view is um, you need operational soundness. You need somebody who, on the one hand, does not want to run things for the quality people we have in this company, but on the other hand, understands that we are now an operating business. The days of thinking we could make acquisitions, bolt on new pieces, and we will be more valuable and more attractive when that moment comes and lightning strikes. Well, lightning ain't going to strike, and that moment is not going to come. And there is going to be a period of great opportunity. But what is going to matter is that you have a business that operationally is sound.
Right.
And so to me, number one is you need somebody who understands how to operate a business from a high level. You need a top executive who appreciates that your job is not being a player. It's not giving the football. It's not that I'm the player coach. It's that you are the general manager and you need to put the pieces together and you need to be very decisive about what works, what doesn't work, what you can bring in and what you can walk away from. To me, that's the person you want running this company.
Right. Right. Yep. That makes sense. Well, good. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Well, so let's get into, some of the important aspects of AYR, maybe spending time talking about the states, debt and taxes, equity positions, but maybe starting with the states. Give me some highlights of what you're focused in on at a state level, I guess in particular, and probably, geographically near to me. I'd love to talk, Virginia, that's one of your newer states. Certainly New York with a license. And then maybe sort of post, the election in Florida. But yeah, give me your updates on how things are going at a state level.
Yeah, so Virginia for us is, the great opportunity that has come our way. I think the way Virginia is organized plays to our strength. I think that we will be able to move in quickly. Um, we now have a team assessing, working with the regulators. Frankly, we're on the ground looking at real estate. So I
Nice.
do think that Virginia will move quickly for us and that we will be able to have a real foothold and that will be a strong piece of our business. To me, it's opportunities like Virginia that this company, to the extent you're talking about any kind of expanding, that's the kind of expanding you want to do. It is, frankly, geographically within an area where we are located already. And although
Mhm.
you would say, why does that matter? It may not matter today, but my guess is in 3 to 7 years it will matter,
Right.
especially if you're talking about building out a supply chain that is unified. So Virginia for us, huge running room, huge opportunity, and so we're on the ground. I'll take it in the order you gave it to me. New York is complicated, and I will admit I am sitting in Midtown Manhattan. I live in Brooklyn. I have served, as I mentioned a few minutes ago,
Mhm.
in New York State government. I did it the first time when I was 21 years old. I did it again when I was in my 50s. I believe in this state, and I believe that the future is not elsewhere. The future is here in New York. With that said, there are times that New York makes it difficult. There's a reason why the line, if you could make it there, you can make it anywhere in the song New York, New York resonates with New Yorkers. It doesn't mean it's a joyous experience. It means sometimes You can only make it in New York if you're much, much better than everybody. We have now a conditional registered organization license. We are, unlike Virginia, in New York, we have a very measured view. Our view is to be successful in New York, you have to be what the advertising originally wanted, which is we will be local, we will be social equity, we will look to grow in places that are underserved in every sense of the word. And so we are moving into New York, but we're moving in with a very thoughtful approach where we are trying to allow our partners. Amethyst is the entity that was created. We have a woman named Jamila Edwards, who is the operator and will run Amethyst. And my view is we need to be deferring to people who are closest to the ground in New York and who understand the small p local political realities of being successful here. Too many companies have come here thinking, it's going to be a huge market, and they've taken a bath.
Right.
I know New York too well to allow that to happen. So I feel good about New York, but realistically, New York is a project where we have to stay close to ground and not look for outsized returns in a way that are unrealistic.
Okay.
Florida, I think, was your third one.
Yes.
Not as a home, not as a residence, not as a place to go as a tax haven, but otherwise, I love Florida, and I love Florida because I think in the long haul, Florida is going to be a huge marketplace. It is already a huge marketplace. From a business perspective, and I largely watch from the sideline, there has been one of the all-time great major hiccups in Florida because you live in a world where, at least at my age, and I skew a little older in the cannabis world. I know you're shocked to hear that, and folks who are watching this say, but he seems so youthful. But no, I'm actually a little older, and I was born in a prior century. And one of the things I've learned the hard way is you follow the shiny object, you get yourself into trouble because you lose perspective. Adult use in Florida was the shiny object.
Right.
I know way too much about local politics to understand why I was never one of those people who thought, let's get ready, it's going to happen.
Right.
And a lot of operators, including us, were betting on Proposition 3 passing. It didn't, and now there's a bit of a reset. And over the short term, you feel the pain of a reset. It's got to be done. The market is reacting to that reality. There was oversupply in anticipation, but along the way, we've done the things we needed to do. We have an appropriate retail footprint. We are about to launch a new facility in Ocala, which will improve the quality of our grow. And I think that over the long run, I don't even mean over the long run, by 2025, by the end of 2025, Florida will prove to be for us a very robust and very successful market. But I think everybody has got to get over the hangover. And by the way, it's not just about cannabis. I think this country overall is living in for many of us, an unexpected new reality, which may not be where we wanted to be in terms of the culture and the society. But from a business perspective, I actually think it's going to be a pretty good place, and I admit that grudgingly, but I think that's absolutely true. I think the federal administration and their sort of default setting on these issues and their politics are going to be much better for the industry than a Democratic administration has been or would have been.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with you, but also fingers crossed that it actually does all come true. I of course thought that coming into, end of 2020, going into 21, but yeah, I agree with you. I think we'll see some good opportunities.
I mean, the lesson people always forget about politics is if you are an important issue, but not the important issue to an elected official, you're a priority, but not a top 3 to 5 priority. and
right,
the elected knows that you're a supporter and perceives you have nowhere else to go,
right,
you're in a terrible place,
right.
right? You're in a worse place than if you were antagonistic to that elected. If you're elected that sees a value in you and you haven't supported them, and the value is you can convert that group of voters,
Yep.
you have real value. And oddly, I don't think this administration views cannabis, frankly, I don't think they view anything as an ethical or moral issue. That's part of the problem with this administration. But
Right.
as far as this industry is concerned, the presumption about conservatives are wrong about this group of conservatives. They do not care. They care about the banking industry. They
Yep.
care about profitability in the country overall, and they
Yep.
care about ensconcing themselves in office. So, if you're looking at it from that perspective, we all represent huge opportunity for them, and it costs them nothing because the phrase, I'll leave it to the states, is one that they're uttering in other areas. And so, from a political standpoint, I'm not going to waste the entire show talking about this, but I'm happy to talk about this anytime, any place. I really do think this is a real opportunity, and oddly enough, not so far in terms of my own experience with working to get marriage equality passed in the state of New York. The difficulty was the Democrats, not the Republicans. The Republicans wanted it passed.
Interesting. Wow.
They
That's
wouldn't say it publicly, though.
Yeah. Well, very interesting history lesson too. Wow. Interesting. Well, good. Thank you for those updates. And so that leads me into, thinking, all right, both between the challenges and the opportunities ahead, it starts to focus in on, where the business is fundamentally, debt, tax obligations, what's, maybe what you see relative to 280E obligations, and maybe talk a little bit about the equity side too. But maybe starting with debt, I think at least seemingly online, there's a lot of focus on companies relative to both their amount of debt and their tax obligations. Where do you see yourself? And then, to the extent that you can describe it, plans and strategies around it.
Yeah, I will paraphrase Mark Twain, um, especially in the cannabis industry, that the only thing that's certain is debt and taxes. I think Twain said death, but it works well here. Um, so I think, and by the way, it's a cute phrase, but it happens to be true, that in this industry, it's not just air. We all have a tax issue. And we
Yeah.
all have a tax issue because fundamentally, there has been something so bizarrely broken on the federal level. And so I wish I could say there was an easy fix. There's litigation over it. I
Hmm.
believe in the litigation, but the litigation is a very, very slow route to change. I
Right.
also believe that given the reassessment that's going on of the Internal Revenue Service, I will be guardedly optimistic that this problem, for either from either a perspective of rescheduling or the IRS getting an attitude adjustment, one way or another, there is, I think, a likelihood that the industry overall is going to have progress on the tax issue. But it's one of those things that is external to us. I don't believe that my pontification, my personal lobbying, my banging on the table moves any of this one iota. But I do believe it will change. In terms of debt, look, we are in a position many of the MSOs are in. And I think I could say generically, from the standpoint of operating a business, we all have too much debt. And we all have too much debt because of the history of this industry and because
Right.
of the complexity of these businesses. However, I'm going to say something that I never thought I would utter when I was sitting at McAndrews and Forbes down the hall from Ronald Perlman. Our lenders are our friends, and our lenders are our partners.
Yep.
And may not be all of our lenders, but most of our lenders really are. And that if you look at the publicly available information about our major lenders and bondholders, you will see they also are shareholders.
Yep.
Some are shareholders by virtue of grants related to refinancing, but they've all been long on the stock and they continue to be long on the stock. And we have a representative of our bondholders who himself is a bondholder, Jared Cohen, on our board. So, the picture that is always painted when you look at debt structure and maturities, unless you've lived in this world, is you can always paint a picture that looks difficult and challenging. I can tell you, and again, my experience at McAndrews taught me a lot about this, that ultimately these problems get resolved. They get resolved at a business table. There oftentimes is a lot of static. We're not even going to have the static because, by the time we hit the next set of maturities, because we are in a position where we have bondholders and creditors who believe in the long-term viability of our business, that we are going to be in a very good place. And again, I can't stress enough the fortuity of the fact that our lenders are also our shareholders. It creates for a complex set of fiduciary issues, and my real sort of professional expertise in life is public company board issues. I teach corporations at New York Law School, so I recognize there are a set of challenges we have as a public company with this look in terms of our equity holders, but it is so much better to be in this position than otherwise because the relationship by its very nature is not antagonistic.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And getting people to work together in those situations are key. You mentioned the comment about maybe this incoming administration being a bit more, favorable in terms of business and regulations. Interest rates, probably the other thing for me that comes to mind, at least within our industry. My personal opinion is I probably see rates going lower with this new administration. That, to the extent that you see it that way, that's probably got to be a little bit of a tailwind relative to debt.
Yeah, and look, I think it's a funny thing, and it is very rare. Maybe it's generational. It's happening twice right now, which is with crypto and with cannabis, where there are industries. Normally, industries evolve. Industries are typically not simply created out of whole cloth. Cannabis and crypto were created. And from a national policy standpoint, there are only two wise policy decisions. And one of them is not ducking. As a friend of mine once said, ducking is not a life strategy. And it's terrible public policy.
Right.
The strategies are either we're going to take it federally and we're going to own it, or we're going to let the states run it, but run it without impediments. We're only hurting the states and we're only hurting the national economy by not getting this in the right place, both in terms of a desired consumer product, an important medical product that isn't really being treated to the fullest extent of what that opportunity is. And it's a huge revenue source.
Right.
And yet we've got this, I'll use a legal term, fakakta approach in this country to what we're doing in the industry. Right. And somebody is going to wake up. It's interesting because gaming had the same problem. And you saw, right, gaming, finally, it's the courts imposed the solution. But right. Everybody was betting and it was illegal. I mean, we had a world in which, everybody I knew, including people in prosecutors' offices, were in a Super Bowl pool.
Right.
We're all gambling. We're buying lottery tickets. Lottery tickets are okay, but I can't bet on a football game.
Right.
It was nonsensical. I wish it was completely worked out, but it is getting worked out. Cannabis is no different, but I think you now have an administration that is likely to say, to heck with it, just fix it, we don't care. And if you look at who is the incoming Commerce Secretary, he is a person who, in Howard Lutnick, knows a deal when he sees a deal and knows when there are opportunities and is willing to pursue them. And my sense is that he is not somebody who is going to take the approach, well, let's just see what happens. And maybe it'll work out as people are losing money on things that should be generating revenues.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so that makes me turn it to equity a little bit. And one of the things that have popped up, at least for me, or on my radar recently is warrants. Lots of use of warrants within this industry and within this space. I was looking at your investor presentation, and you guys have a meaningful amount of warrants out there, but priced at a much higher level than the current pricing is. Well, I know you can't tell me exactly what's going to go on and what you're going to do. When you look at that, and again, this isn't just applicable to you. I've seen this with several other companies in the space. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts in terms of a strategy? How do you look at that relative to using that either one as capital firepower or two, trying to manage dilution? How do you guys look at that?
So yeah, look, dilution in this industry and with us in particular, dilution is always an issue, and you've got to be very thoughtful from the standpoint of value creation. And I think all of this really falls into the same bucket, which is I try. It's probably a good strategy given where our stock price is. I try never to look at stock prices. That was my view at McAndrews. That was my view here, because ultimately, especially in this industry where off of rumor, false expectations, these stocks gyrate
A
in a
lot.
dramatic way. Yeah, I mean, and it's they're unhooked from the financial realities, which is
Right.
why you've got to kind of train yourself to say that's going to be what it is. My job is to create value,
Right.
and if you create value, then the stock price is going to follow, the investors are going to follow, the opportunities are going to arise in terms of the ability to access capital you need. If you don't create the kind of business that appears to have value, none of that is going to happen. And so, right now we are all capital constrained. And I think the only thing to do is focus on operating this business in a way that unlocks opportunities and creates value. And
Right.
sometimes, I mean, I'm not saying this in a way that is, what's the right word? That is forecasting what we are or aren't going to do.
Right.
I'm very careful, but it's hard not to look at this industry and understand that the history may be that more is less. After we've been through a period of a number of years where the perception was less is more is less is now more,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
so I think we've got to get a tighter operation, and I want to make sure, especially where we're trading now, that it would be very easy to take a misstep and dilute things that wouldn't be fair to current holders, and you take that seriously,
Yep.
and you also take seriously the fact that in the long run, the business is either operationally sound or it's not. And if it's operationally sound, and some of these external things get fixed, then your ability to access capital will be there. My
Yep.
guess is it probably will be there before you even get to that place because smart money finds opportunities before the opportunities arise.
Yep. No, that makes sense. Well, so then speaking of all of that, it sort of gets me into the products that you sell. What's going well? What are you guys excited about? Maybe even, product ideas or strategies as you're looking into 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, so we have moved to an area where I think we've gotten a little more operationally smart about consolidating the brands, not having a whole array of product, and again, putting aside what's available in our retail locations, depending on state, it certainly is more than our products. But if you look about what we've done, I think lately, most recently with the Haze line, especially the vapes, the new hardware, I think we are now more focused than ever on what our consumers want and
Mhm.
recognizing that we need to develop a loyal consumer base. Again, these businesses, if you're not smart, um, you start to think that there are opportunities out there that don't really exist. Oh, I'm going to develop a national brand. Well, good luck to you. What you got to focus on, in my opinion, is developing a reputation with your customer base, having the product they want. Folks, I think in the vape space, especially with Haze, wanted a high quality, better hardware. We've given it to them. with respect to vape collections. We launched Later Days just recently. There too, new hardware. And what we need is to be mindful of what the consumer wants and how to produce a product that is both high quality and consistent. And consistency in this marketplace is never easy for all sorts of reasons. It's not just us, but I think we have really turned a corner on the ability to get the products that our customers want on the shelf in a reliable way, in a consistent way that is going to drive more traffic to us.
Are you seeing trends change, and maybe in a surprising way, either geographically or by product type?
Look, I think that the vape space and new entrants to this marketplace, I mean, if you think about it, um, somebody who is a cannabis smoker came in early.
Hmm.
Somebody believes in edibles may not have come in early. So,
Right.
for example, I can speak about my father. My father is 91 years old, another proud resident of Brooklyn, New York.
Right.
Happens to be in Florida right now, but not as a taxpayer. And we'll come back to Brooklyn. Um, but my father knows a number of people in Florida, and these are not people that you would ever think are, the the target audience for our
Right.
product. And these are people not in their 70s, they're in their 80s and 90s.
Yep.
And yet the gummies, and not surprisingly, we offer we offer several gummies. One based on a licensing agreement, another is our own.
Yep.
Um, so I'll mention kind. Um, but that's a product that has a tremendous appeal, and the ability to expand that market and that customer is like nothing I've ever seen, because
Yep.
it truly is a group that it's not like my generation where we were all familiar with cannabis. Cannabis to my parents was something that was exotic, that just didn't really play a role in their life. Now you say a gummy product, I know what my dad's immediate reaction was, what do I need that for? But once he has it once, it's how do I get more of that?
Right.
Because it is
This
an
is
easy
great.
product for him to understand. And so
Yep.
I think that the marketplace overall, but I think we in particular, are getting much smarter about understanding who those potential customers are, how to focus on consistency, how to not worry so much about a glitzy brand. And look, we went, and I was around when we did it. We went through our period, early on. It's now, 4 years ago. Everybody thought they were going to be the next Apple store of weed. I mean,
Right.
in hindsight, seriously, I mean, that's not where this market is, and that's not how it's going to work.
Right.
We talked about developing a national brand before anybody else. Good luck with that, because number one, it's a lovely thing to do. We're all working on it, but that's not where your customer base is. It's not as if, I know somebody who knows the name, who wants Coke Zero in Atlanta and wants Coke Zero in Dallas and wants Coke Zero in Philadelphia.
Right.
It's not how this industry works, and maybe one day it will, but that's a long way away, and that can't be our focus. And by the way, it ends up being a waste of a lot of marketing dollars that just don't need to be spent.
Right. And it seems like you could see a hybrid, right? You can have, the Starbucks of coffee, but you can also have the 20 other choices you can choose from in your grocery store. Like both can successfully operate.
Look, I give David Goubert, my predecessor, tremendous credit. He is really, somebody who came up in that marketing world, and he knows retail and he knows branding. And his point right at the beginning was, you need fewer brands. They need to be identifiable.
Yep.
You can't be everything to everybody, and you need a powerful name that does attract people. But then you've got to recognize that may not be your average consumer. Your
Yep.
average consumer is somebody who wants not the least expensive product, but a quality product, a consistent
Consistency.
product at a good price. And the one thing that has amazed me, and I had not thought about this before, but one of the folks in our business who's been around a long time, who works in cultivation, said to me early on, you do not understand what it means to have a consistent product. He said, when I go and I buy a product, if I don't have consistency, if I don't have reliability, I don't buy it because I need to know what I'm getting, and
Right.
I have limited dollars to spend on this product. So I
Right.
don't want surprises.
Yeah, definitely buying the wrong product and a bad experience it would not be good. Which actually that reminds me about drinks as well. I know drinks is far more seemingly active on the hemp side of things, but I know even in my own local dispensaries here in Maryland, if it's Keef or it's Dixie, I'm seeing more and more THC based drinks, 5 or 10 milligram size. Any thoughts on that? What are you seeing there?
So, what's gotten complicated in the drink space, and you said it just a second ago, it's the hemp-based issues, it's Delta
Right.
8. It's become, I mean, again, to the extent you need a sane national policy, that's an area in which, and I salute people who find loopholes, exploit them, take advantage of them. But in terms of developing a marketplace, it makes the world much more complicated than businesses want or need. I think long term, there is no question in the world that cannabis infused beverages um, are going to be a huge market. We are in this space, but I would say it is not sort of the central driver to what we're doing. But I think there's a reality that you have to be in the space. And I think it will presumably over the next 12 to 24 months shake out a little bit more because it is right now, to call it a regulatory hodgepodge and a maze, it is beyond that. And there's also risk there because I don't know what regulator is going to do in what state. But, I'm telling you, I think you know this. I'm in New York City. I can walk down to the corner
Right.
and buy myself a THC infused beverage that's probably hemp based that's sold next to my Gatorade.
Right.
Now, maybe that's a great thing.
Crazy.
I don't know, but I do know somebody has to think about that.
Right. Right. Yeah, that seems crazy. All right, I am getting close on time. I definitely want to get, your vision for 2025. What are you looking forward to? How does the business change and evolve as you're looking forward?
Yeah, look, I think the key for AYR is we've got to move from what I would characterize as um, good operations to excellent operations.
Okay.
We've got to figure out more what should this company be and where should it be. And we have transitioned finally out of that notion of if there was a new market opening up, we need to look at it to a world where we're saying from the standpoint of planning, where do we want to be? And if the opportunity arises, how do we take advantage of it? And though it sounds like I'm saying things that are very similar, from the standpoint of business operations, it's the difference. Again, I'll paraphrase Mark Twain. I guess I'm having a Mark Twain moment. It's the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. Um, which the actual quote of Mark Twain is the difference between the right word and the wrong word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. But that's where we need to be. We need to understand who we are, what we want to be, and how we get there, rather than chasing what we think is the next great opportunity. It doesn't work in business.
Right.
So, I will quote one of the all-time great Brooklynites, Vince Lombardi: "Strive for perception or for perfection, accept excellence." And that's where we are. And I think we have a great management team. We have a great engaged board, a board that, through dumb luck, has a variety of experiences that I think are really going to help this company moving forward. And, I'm proud to say that we have um, senior executives in this company who are there from inception and have the benefit of what they learned along the way.
That's awesome. Well, so, in for me, living in Maryland, I haven't had a chance to visit one of your stores yet, though I do feel like I've driven by them in Florida, but of course couldn't get in with no medical card. Um, but I have a kid heading to school in Boston, so I'm definitely looking forward to stopping by one of your stores in Boston. So I can't wait for that.
Let me just
Um,
say then, Jamie and Julie, get ready. Get ready. This is
I'm
going
going
to
to try to
matter.
increase the cart purchase size, the average cart purchase size. Um, And then the last thing is, we typically try to do not every Friday, but we have Giving Fridays, just try to give back a little bit. And so is there any charity near and dear to your heart that maybe we can make our Giving Friday gift to today? Is there something that comes to you off the top of your mind?
Look, I started with Dan Slepian and Bobby Adelorado and JJ Velasquez. JJ has an organization that he is deeply involved with called Voices from Within. And it is about those voices are incarcerated individuals who are real human beings who too often in our society have been treated as if they've been warehoused and shunted away because they happen to make a mistake. It is a very, very moving group. There's a documentary out about Voices from Within and a bunch of podcasts. So if anybody is interested in doing something good for people who are too often neglected, who by the way, are supposed to be benefiting from this industry that we're creating, I would ask you to check out Dan Slepian, Voices from Within, JJ Velasquez, and in particular, the not-for-profit Voices from Within.
Awesome. We'll do. We'll definitely make a donation for them. Steve, thanks you so much for making time. I know you're busy and you've got a lot of things going on. So we really appreciate it. For everybody else that's tuned in, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for the support. Feel free to follow up both on the book, Sing Sing Chronicles, right? Sing Sing Diary. So the show or the book. Definitely feel free to make your own donations to Voices from Within. We will also make one as well. Thank you for tuning in. Again, thank you, Stephen, so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. And anytime you need a guest on a minute's notice, I'm happy to get on and talk about everything and anything.
Awesome. Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.